Welcome to Speak Your Mind by Climobilize. My guest for this session is Betsy Rosenberg. Betsy is a true pioneer in green journalism. For the first half of her career, she was an anchor and reporter for the CBS radio network from the mid-1980s until 2007, when she left to cover the Green Climate Beat full-time as an independent producer. And now, Betsy spends her time as the co-founder at greentv.com, an online green media platform. Betsy, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Brad, for having me. I am honored to be part of your first cohort, and I think this is a much needed gap you're filling.
Thank you. We're doing what we can.
Yes, we are, all of us.
In this session, Betsy's going to be speaking about why has declaring climate emergencies failed to create meaningful change? So Betsy, let's start with that question.
I can answer that in two questions and then expand upon that. Mainstream media. In my country, the United States, there is no programming on any kind of ongoing basis on the planet. Perhaps somewhere in public media, maybe a children's show on Saturday morning, and there's occasional specials. At least CNN has done one each Earth Day. Guess what? We need it every day. We need it night and day. We are running out of time. The climate window to act is closing. It's not just climate, but climate is the mother of all eco challenges, exacerbates it, makes it all worse. And we are seeing changes happen so rapidly that even climate scientists have been alarmed. And yet we are not treating it, we in the population and certainly in mainstream media, treating it as the emergency it is. If you want to understand what I'm talking about, imagine what happened. You don't have to imagine, remember what happened when COVID hit. And all of a sudden, at least on our all news networks like CNN and MSNBC, Fox is not a news network. Don't get me started on that, although worth mentioning at some point. Pivoted. They went from sort of all politics to all pandemic news. And when are they going to get to all planet news? And now they're back to the horse race that is the upcoming election in November. And don't get me started on that because it's all over. If Trump wins, just you can kiss the future goodbye. I'll go on record as saying that. So at least kiss my mental health, whatever's left goodbye. I'll come. We'll go to Canada. So anyway, I digress. So the fact that we have a planet, almost literally on fire, is so shocking that there's so little coverage. There's so little talk of it in the streets. Now, I live in 3 of the most liberal cities in America. I have New York, San Francisco Bay Area, and Austin. It's complicated, but in all of those towns, outside of my green circles, people aren't talking about this. Environmental anything. Still, in 2024 now, we can say, what is wrong with this picture? People, they're aware. You have to have been living under a rock to not know there's a climate crisis. But in terms of just consciousness, and maybe people understand that the extreme weather is, a function of our climate changing, but it's just not top of mind and it's not top of talk. And if we had all the news networks covering this, if not 24/7, as not just another news story that barely rates as one of the top 5, but as the story, because if we don't get this right, nothing's going to matter. Not politics, not education, not jobs, all the other issues that are critically important. So I have been focused on this for 27 years, trying to fill the green gap in my industry, former industry of broadcast news. And I have gone to the networks and I've pitched them and I've developed an expertise interviewing some 5,000, green leaders across all shades of green and across the world. And I have learned that they don't want this kind of coverage. And I call it climate collusion. And that's why we started greentv.com to fill that green gap. And the problem is we just need to get it into a 24/7 green news network, a GNN, and then have everybody make it mandatory to watch. You have said, we can't do that. That's overreach by government. Well, you know what? We have to wear seatbelts. We can't smoke in indoor places because personal actions, private actions have a big impact on public health. Let's just say we had a law that said everybody's got to watch green TV and it's 24/7, and people like you and all the fabulous leaders who are courageous and knowledgeable and passionate, and they're on night and day instead of pundits talking about, Trump, et cetera, and his legal problems and the election. Imagine that. And like we have with COVID, we don't have to imagine. It would be a different ball game, and we might have a chance of winning it.
Well, as we were discussing earlier, there's over 1 billion people who live in jurisdictions that have declared climate emergencies. And some are very progressive countries, the entire EU, and nothing happens. Um, so the question is, if policy isn't going to come forward with a declaration, what's the most important thing we can do to get people aware that this is something that we need to take seriously? Because it doesn't seem like people are really getting it.
Right. Well, again, my answer is going to be media, because that's the only way that I know, given my background, to reach the masses. And it is possible. Having worked for the CBS radio network way back when, doing the top of the hour news on 400, satellite stations owned and operated. There's a lot of people who heard me, my cousins, people I went to third grade with, and that is the reach that I wanted to have with environmental news. And having left mainstream media to develop my eco expertise, thanks to all the wonderful people I've interviewed, and trying to get back on that platform, I've learned that they don't want this kind of coverage. They don't want the truth. They don't want the dots connected. And they certainly don't want to, they don't see it as their role to offer solutions. I'll say more about that in a minute, but I just want to say, what if they declared a climate emergency and nobody heard? Like, you can do this in jurisdictions, you can do it at the city council meeting. Maybe it gets a little, article in the local paper, but it's just not on the average person's radar. And you can say people are busy and they're just trying to, get food on the table. All that is true. But there are many people who could afford, especially parents and grandparents who should care about our future, to put more time, energy, and focus into this. And, in the past, Save the Planet didn't work. But this is no longer altruism. This is self-preservation. Humanity and all living creatures are truly threatened. And if we close the window and then it's too late, can't you just hear everybody saying, why didn't you warn us? Why didn't you tell us? At that point, I will jump off a cliff because those of us who have been screaming from the rooftops have just not been heard or listened to enough. It is changing. There's good news. There's more solutionaries out there than ever. That's what I do. I interview Meet the Solutionaries is the name of my series. I invite you to check it out because I just find the best people who have so much wisdom to share. And why not tap into that? What a crime, just as people do wake up and say, oh yeah, but isn't it too late? And then they get depressed, they don't have children. Some of them are suicidal, young people, when all the solutions are truly out there. But if these voices are not being heard, people give up. And so to me, the missing piece was to be a communication bridge between the experts and the public, the greater public.
And we have media personalities who will take a young person who wants to talk about their passion and they will make them fearful and ridicule them on mainstream media. How would you coach young people to talk to the mainstream if they're trying to get their message across?
Oh, well, if CNN and MSNBC would, I mean, they'll interview Greta Thunberg because she's sort of the poster child, and God bless her. But there's many more youth activists, but they don't get invited on. Activists don't get invited on. I can tell you this because I monitor the news. I'm a news junkie from way back. I can't watch it really hardly anymore because there's so much horrific news. When you internalize the climate crisis for so long, and then you see the invasion of Ukraine and Israel and Gaza. There's just so much suffering going on. I have to be careful, but I have monitored the news more than is healthy. And I can tell you, they don't have the people that need to be heard on. They're afraid of the truth. So if any young people or anybody would like to be coached in how to talk to the media, I'll give you training free of charge, happily. The problem is they're not invited on. I'm not invited on to host a show. And why not? Given my experience, given the urgency. So having gone to each and every news network, both directly pitching Jeff Zucker of CNN, at the Sundance Film Festival, cornering him actually, and indirectly through my contacts and getting no bites. What's up with that? And that's when I said, oh my God, they really don't, they're actively resisting. It's not a coincidence. And I don't know how it is in Canada, but to me, this is a story that my country, the networks, and the worst thing, Brad, they think they're covering it now, but I call it greenwashing. For years, they wouldn't even say the words climate change. Now they do, but it's always in passing. And then they go to commercial, and they cover the hurricanes and the infernos, weather on steroids. and all the tragedy, and people have lost their homes and loved ones, and then they leave, and nobody comes back 6 weeks later, 6 months later, 6 years later to see the aftermath. So what is it going to take? Because we've had enough experiences with extreme weather, on our own turf. I mean, when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans back in 2005, I was doing my green show on Air America, and I said, this is climate change arrived on our shores, mark my words. Well, that was 2005. If anyone had told me there wouldn't be any programming on what we can do about it for another nearly 20 years, I would have quit right then. But, when you know too much, you can't.
No, it seems like one of the true failings of the media is connecting the dots between a system that incentivizes the causing of harm, um, and allowing that system to continue. Um, and if you can draw a link between this broken system and some of these climate events, then I think people might begin to see that their way of living, through no fault of their own, is causing these events. And it's not just other people. We're all feeling inflation from climate change, and
Mhm.
that's only going to get worse as people as we have more climate impacts, supply chain impacts, floods, droughts. It's all connected. So, how do we get that connection, connecting the dots into people's minds?
I just saw an alarming statistic and I took a picture of it, but I don't want to take time to look for it now on my crowded iPhone. But it was there was a picture of how much money is being spent on nature saving solutions versus how much is being spent to undo nature in the fossil fuel industry. And Fox News and outlets that will tell you there's no problem. Trust me, it was 3-1, the bad against the good. I can't remember the exact number. I don't want to misquote it, but that says it all, right? Other number that I think is really key is when you ask the average person on the street, and this will show you that our eco IQ is very low. And how are adults supposed to know about all this? We didn't learn about it in school if you're old enough. And you don't have to go back to school and you don't have to listen to a green TV. And so if you want to tune it out, it's all too easy, put it that way, to really understand what we can do about it, what's at stake. But the number that I ask people, do you know how many parts per million of greenhouse gases are on the atmosphere? 9 out of 10, maybe 10 out of 10 will say no. Do you know where we are now, what the safe level is and where we are now? We are at 425 parts per million, I think, of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. 350 is the safe level. So is it any wonder that we're seeing, killer storms and fires and floods, et cetera? So we are in deep. It's not far off, and geographically, it's coming for all of us, and it's not far off time-wise. So what more do we need? We need to be talking about this everywhere, every place all at once, but where everyone is gathered to listen. And that's why we're trying to build a 24/7 Green News Network there's so many activists that need to be heard. We want to be that communication bridge. You need independent media. We invite all independent media providers to come together in one or two places so that we can, get a critical mass, so we can clean up this critical mess.
I spoke with another guest, and he was saying that we have already changed the narrative with young people. They realize that they're not interested in gathering things and collecting things. They're much happier to have better friendships, more community, less stuff. And he would argue, and I would agree, that we are already moving towards a different type of mindset and a different type of um, um, way to assess whether or not we're successful. And that would go a long way to helping people. That narrative that success isn't a material thing, it's much more about connections with people. And he's arguing that we're already down that road. But it's hard to fight when, like you said, the media is bombarding us with things that we need to buy in order to make our lives more fulfilling. And we know it's not true, but it's hard to fight.
Absolutely. And the reason we can't wait till the smarter young people come of age and become the journalists and the engineers and the teachers, we don't have time. And so, to my fellow baby boomers who say, Betsy, forget our generation, even though we helped cause it, partly knowingly, partly not, but the kids get it, the youth get it. And I say, yeah, what are the youth saying? They're saying adults do something, do everything so we can stay in school, so we can have a hope of a future. So while they do understand, we're generalizing, of course, there's all types of values and people and ages and generations, but we just can't wait. So we adults, we parents and grandparents, I'm a new grandmother, need to do our part so we can at least show that we're trying. And when we turn over the keys to the planet or whatever metaphor you want to use, we can show that we tried and didn't just dump it. We're dumping more on them, and so they won't even have a chance. And that's the problem. We've kind of gone from what problem, just in terms of public awareness to, oh yeah, it's too late, we're doomed. Neither of those are helpful.
I read something recently about a group in the United States. It was in the Guardian, and they talked about young people who were impacting politicians in some way where they wouldn't take no for an answer. They would disrupt their existence to the point where it was going to be uncomfortable if you were going to ignore these issues. And I don't condone anything that has any physical element or any violence, but these were not violent young people. And how do we get the activist voice out there without making them look um, like they're screaming fire, fire everywhere, which gets people to tune them out. How do we harness those voices who are trying to make the changes
Mhm.
and get them into the media where you have spent so many years?
Well, I know it sounds like I'm just plugging greentv.com, and I'm only
Okay.
doing it because I've been working for free for 27 years, but it's not about me. We're a small group of volunteers. But just imagine the vision, call it whatever you want, Green News Network. If we had a place for a public forum where night and day you could tune in and see live people like you can on CNN talking about all these issues, night and day, holidays, work days, you name it, round the clock, we'd never, first of all, we'd never run out of people to interview. We'd never run out of problems, challenges, and we never run out of solutions. That would be a place that everyone could have a voice who is doing good green work on the front lines, expert in their field of expertise. And then, first of all, they wouldn't feel so alone. They wouldn't feel so marginalized. And sure, people who are already tuned into their environment would be the ones who are watching first. That's what was always the case with my radio show and now with Green TV. But I think as things get worse by the day, more people will start saying, what is going on? Maybe there is something I should pay attention to. Maybe, I mean, there is something I can do. And then they tune in, even if they just want to find out what the hell hurricane just hit their town and flattened it. The bad news is the good news. The bad news is Mother Nature is pissed, and we're going to be seeing more evidence of that every day. And that will become the good news because more people will be alarmed, as they should be, and more are alarmed. And they're saying, what can we do? But no one's answering that question adequately. What can we do? Because, of course, it isn't just one thing. It's a lot of things. We need to change our consciousness. We need to put on the green glasses, look for ways to conserve everywhere, food, energy. We have so much waste, especially in this country. All these things contribute to not just climate change, but ocean degradation and pollution in the environment, air, and there's no simple solutions, even like EVs, which we think will be a part of the solution. The batteries, involve mining and child labor. So it's not easy. No one said it's easy. But we have to have an eco-consciousness that is lacking right now. That needs to be the first thing we think of. And our environment, I even say use our environment because the air out there, take a breath, becomes the in environment. If we have some more ownership, we'd like to have, personal possessions or belongings, take some ownership, of our planet because we all have a stake in it, especially parents and grandparents. And I just think that if we had that kind of forum, as people found it, we would tip the balance, we would move the needle. And you're hearing this from a media person. So just like a certain doctor will see a certain ailment a certain way, you're going to kind of, I'm maybe a broken record, but I truly believe because I have seen listeners over the years just say, I had no idea. I had no idea. And I don't want ignorance to be the reason we lose this battle.
Yeah, I was going to ask it if you had any final thoughts, but I think you summarized it beautifully there. So if you have one final thought to share, please do.
Uh,
Um, Final message, perhaps.
I just, I have some lines like wake up and smell the carbon, down with dinosaurs. I've been on Fox and, sparred with Hannity and Tucker Carlson, those idiots. Okay, they're still lying about climate change. If they cannot get away with lying about COVID and election fraud, they should be sued. Okay. And I'm looking into trying to find a lawyer, public action suit, public, yeah, action case, because if people are watching, and it's the most popular network in this country for God knows what reasons. If they're watching and they're being told climate change is a hoax, they're not going to evacuate in time when that fire is coming across the ridge. They're not going to get out when that storm is approaching. Okay. And every time we see one of these examples of extreme weather, the signature for climate change, and you hear it every time, I do because I monitor this stuff. We've never seen anything like this before. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So if people have died and lost property because they didn't think climate change was a real threat, perhaps because they watched Fox, that should be a lawsuit and they should be stopped. So we have the disinformation campaign, which is just like the fossil fuel industry, going out of its way to make sure nothing changes, that the status quo remains. So I guess I'll just conclude with saying, please check out greentv.com. If anybody is doing great green work, pitch us. I mean, there's no shortage of stories. What we need is volunteers, so come help us. But I don't know what else to do, but let's create a place where all these things can be talked about, and then we grow the audience for it. So I am a woman on e-mission. My e-mission is to make green media, and green stories as popular as other kinds of news. And thank you for this opportunity to share my views. I hope I don't sound like a broken record.
No,
Those of you who
no.
know what records are, I guess vinyl's coming back, so maybe you do. But I really, I bet my life on the fact that this is a key missing piece. I really do.
Yeah,
If people don't know, you can't act and you can't do the right things if you don't understand the problem. And you'd be surprised how many people still don't really know what's going on truthfully, because it's not being shared in the places where people get their news. Yes, and by the way, newspapers, and there's several that are doing a great job, are better than broadcast news. Again, my focus, because that's my background. But even newspaper publishers don't see it as their role to publish solutions. They see that as Sierra Club's role. Well,
yeah.
guess what? The Sierra Clubbers, God bless them, they're the ones who already get it. We need to go beyond the choir.
Well, I agree. It's a work in progress. Thanks so much for joining us. And I look forward to working with you to solve these challenges. We got a new year, and let's make the most of it. Thanks so much for joining us, Beth.
2024, we need so much more. Let it be, let it happen, bring it on. Thanks, and so glad you're doing this. Climb Mobilize, and be watching what you're doing as well. And I can't wait to hear what your other speakers say about, some of the obstacles, because you've heard mine. Certainly there's others. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.